Hello there, welcome back to Building Blocks special episode for Guitar Tutor, and this is part 2 in which we deal with all of the non-chord builder key finder stuff. Please go and check out part 1. That's the essential groundwork functionality that you need on a day-to-day basis out of Guitar Tutor. Everything that we're going to deal with today is a little bit more fringe, but no less interesting, hopefully. As always, if you like the video, please subscribe and hit notifications to find out when I release content, and head over to onemanandhissongs.com and to download yourself a free copy of this application, in exchange for which I ask you to subscribe. That's all. I think that's a really good deal. So anyway, let's crack on into the functionality. So here we have the metronome page, and it does what it says. It's really straightforward. It's a metronome, but it's a metronome that's capable of describing fairly exotic rhythms by using 3 separate different types of click. And it's surprising how important what the click sounds like governs how you play. So let's speed it up a little bit and start that. Okay. So immediately I'm starting to feel a kind of groove. You know, it's making me want to play the instrument in a particular way. It's just a metronome. You know, it's not. There's tonality to the tones, but that's not really what it's all about. It's the rhythmic feeling that it gives me. I can even take beats away entirely by clicking this little blue box. And again, that's going to govern how your brain processes that rhythm by having those gaps. It's a really good training tool, actually. Playing to a rhythm, playing to a metronome, and then missing out some of the beats really helps to improve your own internal counting, I think. But we don't just have to work in 8 beats per bar. We can have any number of beats we want, and every time we increase or decrease this, we get a new metronome row available to us, and again we can configure those to our heart's content. And now we've got a 13 beats per bar rhythm. Okay, simple enough. Every time we change the BPM, see these delay numbers up at the top? They change. These are convenient first places to start when dealing with a delay unit. You could type any of those numbers into a digital delay unit and it's going to sound pretty good because it's a fraction of the BPM. There was a little bit of space up here on the screen, and so I decided to put, 4 of the most common values that I would typically use. That's all it is. Down below we have this training mode, and here what this allows us to do is, if you're learning a lick that's a little bit difficult for you, you can start it off at 100 BPM and get the notes under your fingers, shed it out for a while, and then every time it iterates, every this many number of bars, the metronome increases by this number. So you can take as long as you want. You can set it to step up into in steps of 1 every 20 bars if you want, and play for an hour. It's completely up to you. But as it very slowly ramps up, your fingers get used to the speed, and by the time you get to the end, hopefully when you're at 130 BPM, which is where you want to be, then you've mastered it. So a handy tool. Again, loads of metronomes out there, but I figured, well, why not add my own? I can add the functionality that I want out of a metronome, and so I did. The intervals page isn't functionality per se, it's just information. It's literally just a static piece of text, so we won't spend too long on it. But basically it's got helpful mnemonics for me. If I'm listening to a piece of music and want to try to identify an interval, then I can go over here and say, well, what sound does the first 4 notes of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star make? Twinkle, twinkle. That's a perfect fifth. This is the circle of fifths. These notes sound better together, sound more comfortable than these notes. The further apart notes are on the circle of fifths, the more dissonant they sound. Now that's maths. There's some heavy physics going on with music, like incontrovertible, inviolate laws of nature. The whole principle of the musical scale is based on maths. And the ratios between notes are mathematically purer associated with connected notes that are next to each other on this scale, than notes that are a long way apart. Well, why is that? It's because G is 7 semitones away from C. That's called a perfect fifth, and that's why the circle of fifths is called the circle of fifths. Why is 7 semitones important? Because after the octave, which is a ratio of 2 to 1, if you play any note on the keyboard and go up an octave, the frequency of that note is twice as high as where you started. Well, the next purest ratio after 2 to 1 is 3 to 2, is 1.5, and that ratio occurs at the 7th note up on the scale. So the perfect fifth away from C, which is G, so we've travelled 7 semitones, that's the next mathematically most pure. And what you actually get is that if you jump up 7 semitones at a time, you get to G, and then from G, 7 semitones gets you to D, and then D is 7 semitones away from A, and you go all the way around, and eventually, if you're at F, let's do this, here's F, and if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we get all the way back round to C. So this is travelling the circle of fifths in perfect fifths. And you can do the same going backwards. If we start from C and we travel backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then we have also travelled a perfect fifth in that direction. But because you're travelling backwards, this note here is the 4th of the scale of C major. And so when you're travelling backwards, it's called travelling in perfect fourths, and it's called the circle of fourths if you look at it backwards. It's exactly the same notes in exactly the same sequence, but if you go clockwise, it's called the circle of fifths, and if you go anti-clockwise, it's called the circle of fourths. I have a little kind of quirky thing with my circle of fifths. The reason it kind of looks a bit weird is that these notes are variable. They're actually drawn dynamically. So if you pick a different mode of the scale, then, and this only works, it certainly works for the major scale, it doesn't work for all scales, but I've just put a different note up at the top, because now D Dorian, from a keyboard's perspective, is the simplest version of Dorian that you can have. Let's just check that out. Go over to keyboard mode. And can you see there's C Dorian, and we've got some black keys. We pick D Dorian, we don't have any black keys. If we're playing in Lydian, then it's telling us that F is the simplest key. Let's do that. And there you go, F Lydian has no black keys. And down here, we have a little box that tells us, for any scale that we choose, what key on the keyboard we want to pick if we want to play as few black notes as possible. So let's pick a fruity one. There you go, the Phrygian dominant scale. And it's telling us that E is the easiest way to play the Phrygian dominant scale. Let's do it. There you go. Now there's no Phrygian dominant scale that uses all white keys, but that's as good as you get. So for any keyboard players out there, if you have no other reason why you would pick a particular key, then use Guitar Tutor to say, in that case, why don't you pick E? If you want to play Phrygian dominant and you want to have a song that has that flavour, that Phrygian dominant scale, pick E, because it's going to make life easier for you than if you've got loads of black keys. If you love playing black keys, then ignore all of this. But, generally speaking, the white key scales are considered to be easier to play. They are easier to travel up and down on the keyboard, they just are. And that works for all of these scales. It's always going to tell you F and G are your choices. There you go. You've got one black key. Notepad is really straightforward. 0 2 7 10. We'll deal with that in a little while. That's for the purposes of the ARP mode. But essentially, whatever I type, if I shut the program down and reopen it, anything that I've typed here will just get stored. It's stored every single keystroke. But it basically just means every time the program loads up, it goes away and has, well, what was last in my notepad? I'll put that back in. So you never have to worry about losing data that you've typed there. There's no save button. It just saves it automatically for you. Take that away. Strings and frets. Let's go back to guitar mode. So you can see here we've got a 23 fret 6-string guitar. We don't have to have. If we want to play a bass guitar, we now have a bass guitar. If we want to play a 5-string bass guitar with a low B, brilliant. We can change any of the nut notes. So if we want to change that to a C, it's now playing a C, and it will redraw the fretboard according to those offsets. These are just defaults, so if I click 6-string guitar, I go back to the 23 fret 6-string guitar that we start with. If I, just as a matter of interest, I shrink this or grow it, then the guitar fretboard changes, and if I'm in keyboard mode, the keys are always the same width, it just adds more of them. Okay. Now then, we've left the most difficult to last, so take a deep breath, and I'm going to try to explain to you how the ARP mode works. And for this we need to go to keyboard mode. It only has any context in keyboard mode. So, okay, lots and lots of notes. What do they mean? In order to answer that question, we need the help of Cubase. So let's just minimize Guitar Tutor for a moment and pull up this bad boy. This is the Yamaha CS80 as emulated by Arturia. One of the most famous synthesizers of all time, used a lot by the likes of Vangelis, if you like, in the 80s. An amazing sounding instrument, but it plays a lot of the presets that come out of the device do this kind of thing. Okay, so I'm playing a single note on the keyboard there. I just pressed a C, and it's playing a different note. Let's have a look at what those notes are. So the first note is a C. So you see that 0 there. That means whatever key you press on the keyboard, it's going to play that note. There's no offset. -12 just means an octave further away. And we're not worried, for the purposes of right now, we're not worried about octaves. So ignore that. The third note that it plays is 10 semitones away. So if I'd started with a C, this would be playing a B flat. And there's a 0, which is back to C again. Now we've got 2, which is a D. A 12, it's another C, don't care. Another 12. And a 7, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, G. Of course it's G. So when I press that note on the keyboard, it's actually playing 4 different distinct notes as part of that arpeggio. Let's go over to Keyfinder for a moment and reset. So let's say we know we're in C, we're in some flavour of C. We pressed a C on the keyboard and that's what we want it to be in. But we want to know what scale those notes are in, or what options are available to us. Now, I worked out when I was playing those notes that it was a C, and then I went and that was a B flat, and then it was a G. We don't have to do that. If you click this intervals box, then the CS80 was telling you there were noughts, and there were twos, and there were sevens, and there are tens. So you don't have to do that mental maths if you don't want to. You can just, key finder works just as happily in intervals as it does with named notes. And we also knew, because we decided, because it's up to us, that we were in C. But we don't know what scale. We don't know what flavour of C. Well, Guitar Tutor helps us. It says these are all the different types of C scale that are available to you if you play those 4 notes. So we can pick any of these and they're all going to work. So let's say we pick C Mixolydian, and so we put that in and we put that in, and now that note that we played on the keyboard had C and it had D, and there were some G's and there was a B flat. Okay, so it all works absolutely fine. Now then, those are the 7 notes of the C Mixolydian scale, but which of those notes can we press on the keyboard and have that entire arpeggio still be in that scale? So let's do a mental exercise first. If I was going to press D on the keyboard, what would happen? Well, it would play a D and several variations of them up and below, above and below. It would play some E's because there was a note that was 2 semitones away from the root, and that's fine because E is in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It would play an A, so that's also fine because A is in the scale of C Mixolydian. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It would play a C. So those are the 4 notes that it would play if you pressed a D on the keyboard. So brilliant. So now we can play. That's a D. And all of those notes are still in C Mixolydian. But we don't want to have to work that out from first principles for all of those 7 notes. I want Guitar Tutor to tell me what notes I'm allowed to play. I don't want to have to work it out myself. And that's what ARP mode does. So, given the pattern 0, 2, 7, 10, those are the interval patterns for that arpeggio that's being played by the CS80. What notes am I allowed to play on the keyboard and have them all still be in scale? And there is 0, 2, 7, 10. And there is the answer. I can play any combination of C, D or G, and it will all be in C Mixolydian. Let's do it. G, D, C. Okay, it all works great. Now, that's a little limiting. There's only 3 notes that we're allowed to play. Well, unlucky. When you have a 4-note arpeggio, you are going to be limited in the different variations of notes that you can play on the keyboard and still have all of the arpeggiated notes be in key. So one of the options available to us is to go back to our synth and take some of those notes away. Well, let's take one of them away. So we had a 0 and a 12. Okay, that 10 there. Let's drop that to a 7. So now we've thrown away the 10. It still sounds good, believe me. Okay. And now we're not dealing with 0, 2, 7, 10. We're dealing with 0, 2, 7. And that's there. So now, in addition to the C, the D and the G, we also have an F and a B flat, and we can play either of those notes and still be in C Mixolydian. Let's do it. C, G, F, C, B flat, G, C. And I can carry on ad nauseum, that all of those notes work, and now it's just a matter of me playing around with those different patterns and finding which ones sound good. I mean, when I came from the G to the F, that sounds really nice. I really like that. And then back down to the C. And I'm immediately writing music. I've taken this arpeggio, which might be a little formulaic and, you know, difficult to be creative with. What am I supposed to do with this thing? Because every time I play different notes, it's moving me in scales, and I don't want to be having to modulate between scales every time I press a different note on the keyboard. Well, now ARP mode is telling me what I can use within that self-imposed restriction of playing in C Mixolydian and still sound great. It gives me all of the options. And don't forget that original choice, when we picked the C Mixolydian, we didn't have to pick C Mixolydian. We could have picked any of these scales. So if we now change our mind and we go to C Dorian instead, if we go back over to ARP mode and have a look at 027, now we have a different range of notes that we can play on the keyboard, and this is kind of mind-blowing. It's exactly the same arpeggio that's being played by the CS80. It's still playing the same static 4 notes, but now when we play that combination of notes, it's going to sound different. Let's do it. F, B flat, C, B flat, E flat, back down to C. So all of that was in C Dorian. It's again completely up to us what we do with this information. We could switch, we could have the verse in Mixolydian and the chorus in Dorian, and we've got now a very significant number of musical directions available to us. We have options, and that's what Guitar Tutor's done. It's given us all these options that when we just looked at the keyboard and we listened to this 3 or 4 note arpeggio, we didn't really know what to do with it. It's difficult to be creative with an arpeggio because it ties you so heavily to play exactly those notes. And now it's broadened our horizons and given us all that flexibility and creativity. It's all about being creative. So that's the ARP mode. And that, in a nutshell, is Guitar Tutor. You can hide this left-hand toolbox completely if you're a little bit tight on space, just to shrink things down a little bit. I very often work with, just a single fretboard because I've still got functionality there. I can still, not when I'm in. Hang on a minute. Turn chord builder off. There we are. And then hide that again. So now I can still mess around with chords, and I've still got all of that functionality, but just in a much smaller interface. But other than that is Guitar Tutor. That's what it does. So I hope you found some of that useful. I use it, like I say, daily. This thing is always open. If I'm writing music, Guitar Tutor is running, and I'm plugging scales and chords in, and I'm messing around in ARP mode when I'm playing on a keyboard that has an arpeggio sound, a preset, working with it. I'm using all of this stuff to inspire me to be musically creative, and I find that I work best when I do a little bit on my own and close my eyes and play something and say, oh, that sounded nice. Now then, tell me what I just did. And then Guitar Tutor says, well, you could be playing in blah, 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 blah. Like, excellent. Right, okay, done. I'm going to pick that. What's that going to sound like? What's that going to sound like when I play those notes, when I play those chords? Tell me what chords I'm allowed to play. Play this chord. And so we're constantly batting backwards and forwards between each other. Head over to onemanandhissongs.com, grab yourself a copy, in return of which I ask you to subscribe to my channel. Hit notifications. I really hope you enjoy using the tool. Please be creative. If you do enjoy it and you come up with a cool idea that it helps to inspire, put a note in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to have a chat about what you think about the product. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.